Okay, that's brilliant. That's filled my knowledge in on the ICSM, so that's worthwhile coming to Australia to to have that filled in. Okay, we're now at our last speaker, and this is Simon Costello. He's going to take us up to lunch at 12:30, and he's going to talk about the role of standards to geospatially enable better data integration. Simon, please.
Thanks, Alan. I'll echo my thanks to Chris and Margie and yourself for inviting me to come and present today. It's really good to see familiar faces around. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. They are Australia's first geographers, and there is a lot that I've learnt about geography and connection to country that's helped me in my personal and professional life. So I extend my respects to any elders who are here today. Next slide, please. I've really come here with 4 key points I want to get across. Now, I know I'm the last speaker before lunch. I don't want to be in between you and lunch. So if I get cut off, there's 4 things that I'd like you to take away from my presentation. But what it comes down to is I'm here because I need help, and I have challenges and opportunities for us to be collaborating together. And what my request for help comes from is that people in government who are not geospatial are waking up to the realisation that the problems they are dealing with are place-based. There is a problem happening over there or a problem happening throughout my whole jurisdiction. It might be doing things like addressing social disadvantage. It might be natural disasters, which has traditionally been a big part of geospatial, or something similar. So they are gravitating towards this concept of place-based reporting. And also they require data to be able to drive that decision-making in a defensible manner. So as someone pointed out before, policy has an intent, and where do we need to go to intervene in those particular areas as well? So that's the first point. Second point is, even though government is waking up to that, the maturity of the policy developers and the analysts within many government departments in the Australian government is not as mature as what it needs to be, if I can put it politely. And geospatial forms part of that mix around a data profession, all that too. So again, opportunities for our sector to influence and help that maturity grow. Third point, or actually it's the 4th point on the slide, but the organisation I work for now, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, it's been tapped on the shoulder to be the lead data agency within the Australian government. Like, data is in our blood. We produce statistics that describe Australia's economy, our population, the demographics. So there's a whole range of indicators that various parts of government, but also people in their everyday lives depend upon. You want to know how the cost of living's changing? You go to the ABS, it tells you, yeah, price of bread has gone up, 20% in 2 years. Might not explain why, but at least tells you that. So we have a role that is still to be fully utilised, but how can we take data and geospatial with that to build up the maturity within government to answer these place-based questions? And third point on that slide, which is my 4th point, standards are an integral part of that. And as Craig said, I'm preaching to the choir here. I don't need to be convincing anyone here, but it's fundamental to achieving that vision. So they're the 4 points. If I get cut off, come and talk to me about the rest of the stuff in the presentation. So next slide, please, Margie. So again, the challenge and opportunity. I've talked about that concept of place-based reporting and the other concepts. That's in the top right. In the Australian government's response to that, it has formulated a data and digital strategy. And I want to draw your attention to some really key points that I think are relevant to us meeting here today. The Australian government views data as an asset. Assets have value. So you've got to invest in it to keep the value going. And interestingly enough, in some work that I did consulting over the last 12 months, there's a standard around asset management, 55,000. Absolutely useful standard, and particularly in the reference material that I was drawing upon to help on this job in Western Australia, really good guides on how to implement it, both within a jurisdiction and within an agency. And I'll come back to that point towards the end of my presentation. So good knowledge about data as an asset. Note there's a call there about compliance with standards. It specifically calls out metadata, and that's relevant for everything. And then the other point there is about strengthening governance across different levels of government. And so again, it's really good for me to follow a presentation from Craig that shows how the different levels of government in Australia could and should be collaborating on data and the standards that go with that. The only other point I want to make from this slide, just down the bottom around the Bureau of Statistics, as I said, we are front and centre of bringing data together to solve these place-based decisions. And even from our own internal business practices, we run Australia's 5-yearly census. We heard from the Speaker from Defence about the behemoth that Defence is and the amount of work that has to go into deployment of logistics, those sorts of things. Between the census, running elections, which is not us, these are all, if not the same size, but close to in terms of the magnitude of the logistics that need to be deployed. Each agency will say we're the largest peacetime operation in terms of deployment of resources, fine, but it does show the importance of making those operations efficient. You need good data to do that. You need good geospatial data to do that, and you need good standards to underpin all of that as well. Next slide, please. These concepts aren't new. So I'm going to take you back 5 years, and many of the people in this room are involved in this. In 2019, the Australian government ran a data integration partnership program across several Australian government agencies, where this concept of place-based reporting and the data challenges that went with it were first explored. And in this, there was a concept at the time we called location index that tried to bring together or understand those different representations of geography and what we might need to do to make it easy for those different representations of the geography to talk to one another without the need for specialists to actually do the analysis and operation. Next slide, please. So where we're trying to get to now, even that actual problem statement from 5 years ago has not changed. I've validated this in this role, and people are going, yeah, it's still there, still the same thing. So, and there's a caveat I added to this presentation quite late. So 5 years ago, when I talked about this, I wanted anyone to be able to use any kind of geographic information, doesn't matter what geography it's on. I wanted anyone to be able to analyse that, disseminate it and report on it. And I wanted anyone to be able to just take that and understand it straight away. They were the 3 key pillars. The caveat I added is down the bottom of this slide. And again, James talked about this in his presentation from Defence. In Australia, we operate under the Privacy Act, and in my agency, I operate under the Census Act. Both of them they're stronger than guidelines, but they talk about the need to respect and properly manage what's called personal information, and in some cases, sensitive information. So that's information that could identify you, Matt Purse, or you, Chris Boddy, or you, Craig Sandy, or you, Alan Jamieson, in a way that you don't necessarily want to be identified. And I've been in this role for 2 months, coming from organisations where it's been all about make it all open, nothing here to see, like let's make this available so anyone can use it, to organisations that are dealing with personal and sensitive information on a daily basis. And again, James articulated this really well. How do you balance the competing priorities of maximising the value of your data through open data to securely managing personal information? And I've just been amazed at how much geospatial is getting caught up in that. I think I kind of knew it beforehand, but even the concept of an address, right? there's two schools of thought. Is that personal information? And there's actually been a ruling, I can't remember how long ago it was, by the Federal Court of Australia, because there were court cases around this. Up until that point, an address was regarded wholly as personal information. This court ruling sort of overturned that, said address information by itself is not personal information, but it is the ability to link it to a name or to something else that does make it personal. So that's, again, it's a great challenge and a great source of tension. But I can tell I broke ChatGPT with this because it was just to like help me, get some answers a bit quicker. But it kept coming back saying it's personal information, or it might be personal information. I just kept pushing it, pushing it. I threw this ruling and went, oh yeah, okay. This has actually said it wasn't regarded as personal information. So I was quite happy to give ChatGPT some nice feedback on that. And I'm digressing, but that is why you don't ever trust anything you put into that. But there is an important lesson in that I will touch on. That third pillar about anyone can easily use and interpret geospatially enabled statistics, right? We want to move more into the unwashed masses being able to use what we do. But if they are uninformed or see something and then just accept it at face value, right, there's a risk and a threat in that we as professionals and leaders in that, I think there's an opportunity for a role that we can play. We don't have to be doing all the work, but at least be uplifting the expertise amongst the general population about, is that map lying to you? How do you know it's lying to you? Have you asked the right question? So that's a big driver for me. Next slide, please. Ian, Zafar referenced quite a few activities that have been happening in UNGGIM. This is related to UNGGIM. This is from the statistical side of the UN, but again, this was developed last decade. Right in the heart of this is a key element that needs standards to be able to integrate data that is geospatial, hardcore geospatial, through to statistical information or bringing in data from different domains. You need the standards as the glue. Otherwise, it's not easy to join it together. So again, so much thinking's been done around this and it's still valid. And I'll come back to, well, what do we need to do to push it over the next hurdle? Next slide, please. I won't dwell on this slide too much. I'm going to bring the focus now into my own agency, the ABS. So I'm in a new role, like sort of recently established, and one of my tasks is to further develop an internal location data ecosystem within the ABS. And a couple of key concepts that I'm still trying to get my head around, so I'll try and explain it, and maybe that will help me understand a bit better, is in the ABS, a lot of data, they use these two concepts. One is a spine. So you think about the spine on your own back, it's a structure that lets other things bolt in. And if that's working right, the signals from your brain to your fingers and anywhere else all work properly. But that spine needs to be constructed in such a way that lets that happen well. The other concept is a concept of a data asset. So again, I go back to that concept of an asset. Asset has value. It's not just, a data asset is not just a data set. In our case, it's a combination of data sets that together has value that's greater than the individual parts in it. So this is where I've got to get to. Next slide, please. This is what it looks like in my part of ABS. They've got these spines. There's already one that's developed around people and one around businesses, right? And there are units, what they call a unit, that says, right, me, Simon Costello, I'm in there somewhere. I might have a different form of ID. So it might be a social services ID or a work ID or my tax file number. But I'm still a person, right? That's still a unit. And it's the same with a business. They might have a business ID. That's it. We all know when you come to location, there is more than one way to define a location. Where are we now? So we're at 20 Bridge Street. I have a lat long. There'll be a parcel ID. I'll have a grid reference. I'll come back to grids in a minute. Plenty of other ways to define geography. It's not one single unit, but all those units are valid. So how do I bring all that different data that is referenced to those different units in such a way that I can address those policy questions up on the top right? That's where the place-based decision making is, but I need the location spine or the location index set up in such a way that makes my ability to integrate data really, really easy. Next slide, please. And again, this is just reiterating that point. So in different domains, different sets of data are created, and if they have a location element, whether it's that 80% of data has a geospatial element, I don't know if that's a lie or a statistic or what, different representations. How do you bring them together? And particularly, ABS has traditionally operated in the bottom half of that triangle. It's been around economic data and social data, but as we modernise our practices of generating statistics, we're going to be leaning on environmental data. If we are trying to work out agricultural production, we want to go down a path of using satellite imagery to determine yields. That's grid-based data. ABS has not worked with grid-based data. How's it going to do that? That's part of my challenge here today. Next slide, please. So what's happened in those 5 years? So again, with that data integration partnership of Australia, we did some test cases. We could show how you could join these things together. In parallel, it's a shame Dr. Opperman wasn't here because he was involved in this, I think. New South Wales government also looked at this concept of a location index, and they're at a point now where they've got a proof of concept that can join some of those different measures of geography together. So you can crosswalk really easily. And they've actually used ABS data to do that. It doesn't yet deal with grids. It doesn't deal with network data, but certainly identifies in the land administration space, like addresses, land parcels, even coordinates. It can crosswalk through that. And then finally, Digital Atlas, you're getting another presentation on that today. There's the front end to make this place-based reporting a reality. But they are still only individual components of that bigger picture. And there is so much that still needs to be done on that back end. Stuff that doesn't appeal to policy people, but if they want it to work, it's got to get done. Next slide, please. Right, so this is the last, or second last slide. What I tried to do here was point out, at least in ABS's journey, where current standards work. But I don't want to just go through the list. What I want to point out is where the gaps are, that I've seen it. And if you see other gaps in here, please tell me about it too. But the gaps that stand out to me, and because Matt Pearce is sitting in front of me, I'm going to call him out first. This one here, standards for gridded data. So when Matt and I work together, we're looking at discrete global grids. I actually need an implementable standard around that now. All right, we're going to talk. That's why I'm here, because I knew you were going to be here. So there's one. Craig talked about the addressing standard due for renewal. I was involved in the last review of it. I'll shudder to think I've got to go back through that again. But anyway, if that's what it is, that's what it is. Big challenge for me. I've listed 2 Australian standards in there that are derived from the ISO standard. 4819 is how addresses are created, I think. The second one is how addresses are disseminated. And this is where the problem is. Craig and I were talking about this before. We're about to run a census in the next couple of years. There are quite a few addresses that exist in what we would call special dwellings, but things like remote communities, caravan parks, retirement villages, that the address is compiled through other processes, through, say, Medicare or tax office records. Those addresses, well, first of all, they're not captured in a way that is compliant with the 4819 standard, and they are not validated against that, and they are also not disseminated. Right? We're about to deploy thousands of people to go out and collect census information, and we know that there are still problems in that. It's because the address data is not meeting a standard, and it's not meeting a standard that is implementable. I'll come back to that point. The other couple of points I wanted to point out on here, second last point, because there's OGC people here. I love that OGC takes ISO standards and makes them implementable. You think about what's been put into WFS, WMS, and all the things that have come from that, fantastic. One question I do want to raise here is, when I was talking to Chris, and Chris and I had worked on some standard stuff in the last 12 months, and he gave me this big list. Here's all the ISO standards. This is what goes into OGC. So I've got to go back to this. Went back. Oh, the list has changed. OGC is now moving into all these APIs and looking at standards around APIs. Great. What's that made for, the standards that were around WFS, etc. When we had a bit of a discussion about that. Yesterday, I get briefed by my section, one of my sections. Census has gone through a pretty big process over the last couple of years through Digital Atlas to uplift its ability to publish geospatially enabled statistics in services, web services. It used to be still downloadable tables or in formats, this GeoPackage format that was an absolute nightmare to kind of deal with. Gone to services, got told, yeah, we've spoken with our users, they're really happy for us to go to services. And I said, I'm talking with OGC tomorrow, and they're saying they're going straight to API. What do we do? So again, that's something I'd like to discuss after this. And it comes back to my final point around implementability, if that is a word, of the standard and how other people can catch up. I'm reminded of an analogy that I'll call the African mobile phone situation. Now, I haven't been to Africa. If this is wrong, please tell me. But I've been told in Africa, they've leapfrogged. Not many landlines in Africa. Everyone went straight to mobile phones because you could. And so am I presented with an opportunity here with ABS and with many other Australian government departments to leapfrog? Do I not bother with these individual web services? Do I go straight to APIs? Do I go straight to a solution at the end that makes it easier for a user to engage with the data without trawling through a list of, search for this particular data set, here's all the web services, which one do I look for? Like that problem is still here 5, 10 years later. That's the situation I want to avoid. Some other points I just want to make on this slide, given what some of the other presenters have said too. On that last point, standards have to be implementable and reusable, and they will change depending on the national context. As I said, I've got some authority in my legislation to work with others to enforce is the word in there. I wouldn't like to use that, but work with others to encourage use and adoption of standards. Intergovernmental Committee on Surveying and Mapping, one of its core roles is how to make data consistent, and there's consistent approaches to that. So we've got those constructs in Australia. Third point, echoes presentation from India about avoiding vendor lock-in. Everyone will implement a standard or can implement a standard differently. And I have first-hand experience of where vendors, I won't say who they are, but say, oh, yeah, we've adopted OGC. Yes, you've adopted a version of it, but does it line up with data that maybe has come out of another system that is open source and they've implemented it differently and they don't join up? So again, all those steps in the standard development and implementation stage, like if we want to achieve success, it's got to go all the way through. And again, I feel like there's an opportunity if we've got some agencies that have this sort of legislative authority to kind of keep things going. I'm going to try and address it. Don't know if I'll get there. But again, I don't want a Apple versus Android situation where you can't move between the two. I've worked in private sector. I know it's about like you get people in, you lock them in because that's how you make your money, and you give people that satisfaction that they're getting things out like that. From a government point of view, I echo the Indian government's presentation, and I'll use some stronger words here. The government will not tolerate that situation. And we've been called out before. where we've been locked into a particular vendor, and then they've gone in a particular direction that ends up increasing costs. And that's not, government wants to see competition and marketability in the marketplace. Final slide. I know it's 2 seconds on that. I want to draw your attention to the bottom. So this comes from two different concepts. One comes from defence around capability bricks. You need all these bricks to deliver your outcome. And the other is the theory of change, which is something around program management. What's your long-term outcomes? What do you need to do now? Standards is down the bottom. That actually means it's one of the most important, because you cannot deliver what you've got at the top if your foundation is not strong enough. So that's it from me. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
There's a lot in that, a lot to unpack. Coming from the UK, a lot of those arguments are exactly what we're talking about at the moment. So we have an Office of National Statistics. I represent Orton Survey, who are the geospatial side of the government, and we are actively talking about a single location index for our country, regardless of those geographies. So those points are all pertinent. I think there is an awful lot of intolerance of being vendor lock-in, is what you've said. And to your point regarding OGC, with different standards being adopted, OGC have actually got a method to validate implementations. So if you've got two suppliers and they're both to supply data in the same standard, you can actually go through that validation process. So these things, people are talking about it, and they are seen as problems. Does anybody have any questions for Simon? He's packed a lot in there. Yeah.
Since Simon started with they need help. Just a thought, this could be a potential solution. When you said there are two different organizations using standards, which are open standards, but still they are not able to exchange data in a way that solves the problem, basically. For example, say my name is like 4 words, Nitya, Yuga, Veena, Krishnan, Shanmugam. Vic Roads have Yuga Veena as my middle name, whereas that is my first name. My first name has 2 words. Yeah. In my passport, it's the other way. So whenever I go for an identity, when I give the certificates, there's always an issue, and I have to say, like, here's my passport. This is the actual way my name is. So there is a standard exchange model, like it's called NIM, National Information Exchange Model, which could be, I believe it is from US, which we could, in Australia, we could use something like that, which can be like the backbone, as you said, the spine, and the other data sets could be plugged into it. And when data exchange happens, it goes via the standardized exchange model, which will convert. It's like a translator that translates, say, I'll just use my name as an example, Vic Roads, Nitya, Yuga, Veena, middle name, Krishnan, Shanmugam, as like, oh, no, this is actually the first two. There are only 2 fields here, first name and last name, and there's no middle name. So this could be a solution. And I'm proposing, like, Enterprise Architect, the product that we develop, is used for development of TC211. We also have the ability to create this exchange models, and we support open standards that will help solve the problem.
Yeah, I'll talk with you after.
Yep. Okay.